Apollo is a cult. It has charismatic leaders, astronauts, senior personnel, James Webb, Gene Kranz, Neil Armstrong. These are the charismatic leaders who you cannot challenge. It has holy relics scattered around, rockets, lunar modules, spacesuits in museums. We can go to worship them in the museums. It also has holy scriptures, the Apollo record, the Apollo photographs on the moon, you know, that impossible thing to do. The Apollo records, the Apollo photographs, the Apollo films, the endless commemorations of this event. Over 50 years ago, they still commemorate it. So it's become a cult. It has religious worshippers. It has believers who will not in any way accept heretical questions from people like us. So there's no point in even engaging them because they will not address the questions that we raise. They have faith that Apollo was real. We have knowledge that Apollo was faked. Never the twain shall meet. Oh dear. So Apollo is a cult, and NASA is responsible for its offspring, i.e. Apollo. And now they're trying to launch Artemis, Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, as the successor to Apollo. It'll have the same effect. It won't get anywhere, as we see, because enough people are now looking around and saying, okay, well, if it was so easy 50 years ago, what's the problem today? You can't even get a rocket off the ground properly. They explode.
That's good for the religious part, because Stephen Hawking was the Pope. And when he died, you have to wait for the next puff of smoke to come out to name the next one. So that's got to be Elon Musk. No, he's the one pushing the smoke out.
I think Elon Musk is rather too sensible to take on that mantle. We shall see. There will be somebody come along who will inherit the aura of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, all the other astronauts who are worshipped. They go around the world expounding on their ideas of what happened on the moon. Thousands of people listen to them. Presidents, princes, popes, potentates, kings, queens, prime ministers. They all worship at the feet of these people.
And don't forget that the agency, NASA, certainly likes its symbolic numbers.
Oh, it does.
We could get Randy to write the script for those people.
I think he's doing that already.
Yes.
You see, they've been found out, and we are the heretics of Apollo. We are the people who say, no, it didn't happen that way. You lied to us. You created fraud, fiction, fabrication, and you should be called out for it. And they are being called out for it. There's a comment I had on an email a few days ago from somebody who's obviously listened to Apollo detectives. He said, you know, when they supposedly landed on the moon and they took off after they'd done all their jumping about and they mated up with the command module and discarded the lunar module, which crashed back onto the lunar surface. Where are all the pictures of those? Because so far as I know, all the Apollo lunar modules, once they had got the astronauts back connected with the command module, so the story goes, they then released the lunar lander to crash back onto the lunar surface so they could use their earthquake devices, their sensitive devices to do something. And they say that the moon rang like a bell when they did that.
It's funny how they orbit when they want it to orbit. It's like Bugs Bunny cartoons. You run off a cliff and you keep on running until you notice that you're not on the ground anymore, and then you start to fall. They are orbiting perfectly at 60 miles at 6,000 miles an hour, and they disconnect it, and all of a sudden it falls. How do you operate the little retros on the LEM to deorbit the thing unless there's somebody on board to do so?
Good question.
If they release it, it's going to stay in that orbit. And there's no way they're going to tell me that they had any Bluetooth connection to that machine to fire those things.
They hadn't invented Bluetooth back in that day.
And then the other thing is did they have any fuel left in that vehicle to even fire them?
Apollo 11 didn't, did it?
No, they were out of everything.
So where are the pictures of the lunar
Did you
landers?
find some?
Yeah, I found them. Look at this.
Yeah, I was looking at them last week. They just released them. When I was looking through some of the LRO, all of a sudden I'm coming up, oh, gee, they got images of the crash sites of the LEMs.
But are they recognizable as LEMs?
No, they just look like a dot in the ground, like any other crater. They just put an arrow to it and say, there's the landing site.
Yep.
Standard stuff, isn't it?
It's like moon rock, put moon rock on it. It now becomes a moon rock.
Yeah, it's magic, isn't it? Magic. It's
Yeah.
the magic of Apollo.
Well, that's why they keep the plaster molds around, so they can recreate the same shot that they originally created from those plaster molds. That's the only reason. They're still in service and operating after 50 years. That track that they have, everything else that they're using, they keep that set up. That's not just for display purposes or anything else. They actually create the same simulation over and over again with that. And that's why the resolution doesn't get any better.
There's a crater for the Apollo 12 lunar module impact. There's one for the Apollo 14 S1VB impact. These just came out.
They're desperate to maintain the sacred scriptures.
But
And we
again, they look all they look like is the craters we all see. They don't look like anything. There's nothing there except just an arrow or a little yellow circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are a little whiter on the radial spray that they put on it.
Well, quite a lot of things crashed onto the moon. I mean, some of the Ranger craft crashed onto the moon.
Most of them did.
You know, some of the surveyor craft crashed onto the moon.
If they even made it there. And
Yeah.
I will speculate on my own personal, I do not believe that they had anything that was viable, that they could communicate with or anything else. Whatever they shot up, they would have lost communication with it. I mean, they got directional antennas, everything else. These things are spinning around. God only knows where they went.
These photos are 2 years old. They were put out in June 28th, 2022.
Yeah,
It's
I
only a
just
couple
happened to
years.
be looking at LRO photographs and then all of a sudden realize that they got the crash sites up there as well.
Well, they had to show them, didn't they? Because that would then confirm Apollo. That's the cult of Apollo. They have to maintain the story. They have to maintain the narrative. They have to keep the public believing it. But if you ask the average person, which I did today, I was buying something in a chemist and talking about photographic film, and the person serving me said, "What's photographic film?" I mean, that's how far away we are. I said, "Well, what about those moon landings? Do you believe that?" "Oh, no," they said. No, I never believed that." Well, at least they're fairly sensible. But it's just ridiculous what's going on. Absolutely ridiculous. NASA are exposing themselves, to coin a phrase, as being incompetent idiots because
Right.
they have to maintain the cult of Apollo so that Artemis can follow along and can be a cultess.
Well, you should explain to them that photographic film came right after carving it into a rock, just like Fred Flintstone did. You know how they had the woodpecker in the camera,
Woody
etching
Woodpecker.
the picture into stone? After that, they created photographic film.
Yeah, so you could
Right.
record them hammering it into the stone. Yes, makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, at least that would work in the vacuum of space. I mean, the bird wouldn't survive, but the idea is there. The concept is there.
Yeah. So let's worship at the cult of Apollo, guys. Let's bow down to the sacred scriptures. Let's worship the heroes, the charismatic leaders. Let's worship all them and see how we feel.
Don't forget their sacred numbers.
Oh, we got the sacred numbers too. But good point. Yes. There's a lot of sacred stuff about Apollo. And now it's quietly unraveling because that's how all cults end. Cults end when the charismatic leaders disappear from this planet. They wave goodbye and say, "Right, I'm off. Bye-bye."
Yeah, well, the money has to dry up as well. The biggest driving forces of any cult is the funding going in, and they have tremendous funding going in. And of course, if you look at even the way they named all of the missions and all of the equipment landing on there, they all have symbolic meaning, part of their cult.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, because NASA itself was a cult. It was a cult of occultists. That's how it started. I mean, look at the originators of what became NASA. Back in the early 1950s, You have people like Jack Parsons. He was the guy who developed a solid-state rocket. It was called JATO, Jet Assisted Takeoff. And he was experimenting out in the desert and things were exploding all over the place. He didn't care. He just wanted to get on and produce something that worked. It's still working today. They're the solid fuel boosters on the side of the Artemis rocket. They were originated by Jack Parsons, who was an occultist.
The Ordo Templi Orientis.
That's the one, yep. That was all. It was in Pasadena, I think that was.
Then you also have people like fiction writers that were just actively writing about space travel from the 1920s on, right? And then you hit people like Arthur C. Clarke, who really made an impact. And of course, he worked out a stationary orbital path without having any knowledge that the Van Allen belts are there.
No.
This one fella in the comment section here was quite interesting because I said to Scott yesterday, I says, you watch, and I'm going to put a graphic representation of the Apollo command module entering the Earth. And I'm going to put another one right beside it, and it's going to show the plasma field around the Van Allen belts. And I'm going to put the two together. And I want to see if people are going to notice what plasma is without me actually writing it there. So then I said, you know what? Somebody's going to say it, so I'm going to write it. This is what plasma looks like on a ship. This is what plasma looks like in the Van Allen belts. All right, fine and dandy. Now this guy comes back and he says, I don't understand what you mean. It makes no sense. So what? A radio signal cannot get through the plasma sheath of a ship coming in through the atmosphere. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't believe it. I was right. What do you think is inside the Van Allen belts? Plasma. What do you think the Aurora Borealis is? Plasma? It's the same thing that's around that ship.
Yeah.
So how on earth are those signals at over 2 gigahertz getting through it with one single dish on the ground to receive it? Never mind a whole array of dishes. I could see that, maybe. But one single dish? Come on, guys. Give me a break.
It's the same with people who witter on about the reflective mirrors that Apollo put on the moon that you can fire laser beams at, and you get a signal back without realizing it was being done 6 years before Apollo by the MIT and by the Soviet Union. They were getting a signal back off the moon. You don't need a mirror there. You just fire a laser at the moon, it reflects back. That's what lasers do.
And how could it reflect back after 50 years of dust buildup on there?
No, they're questions you shouldn't be asking cults. There are only certain questions you can ask a cult, and that is, what a wonderful person you are. Will you sign your autograph? Can I pay you money for it? That's what you ask them.
Yes, how much do you need to continue on? They're like any other religion when it comes to that.
Exactly.
They ask you to believe without any evidence or proof. The stories are fantastic. They trigger the human imagination. That's what's driving them. Religion has had that same thing for thousands of years, and it's actually preying on the ignorance or understanding of human life. And people can't accept their own death, so they fall towards a religion because they think it'll give them an everlasting life.
But the problem with that is they think they're being oppressed by the government, and then they go and join these cults, and they're 10 times more oppressed when they get into it.
Yeah.
What's the point?
With much less money as well, because you've got to give all your money to the cult.
So does that mean that these people that are coughing up all their money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy all of this occult memorabilia that NASA is selling, cameras, rocks, you name it, they're selling it, pendants, space pens, well, that's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what they're coughing up, so that's what they're willing to pay for. But when they find out it's not going to be worth anything when this all comes to the light, I'd like to see them try to get a refund. Good luck.
Oh, that's why you have lawyers for, isn't it? Lawyers can do anything. They're magic creators.
Imagine what they would have to do with all of the museums alone.
All the people who pay their money to come and worship at the relics, you know, the Saturn V rocket at Cape Kennedy, they all pay their money to come and look at it.
They're all reproductions of everything, right? Because They have museums in every state.
So if you look at it this way, then the museums are actually their church.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And of course, they incorporate the Air Force and military in those as well.
You have to mix military in with the religion. I mean, you cannot have that. That has to go. Those two go hand in hand. Although you're not supposed to, but they do anyway. And this is no different.
That's been going on for 1,000 years, ever since the Crusades. Politics and religion.
Now you're reminding me of Monty Python.
Yeah.
'Tis but a scratch. And of course, don't forget that the confluence of politics and religion created the banking system we know today.
Yep.
That was being operated 1,000 years ago. Did very well. It was a very good invention. Doesn't mean to say it's right. So, of course, NASA are going to get involved in that, aren't they? They're occultists. That's why all their rockets are named after Greek gods, Saturn V, and they use Nazis to build them. They'd only been fighting the Nazis about 6 months earlier, and yet here they were employing them. It's crazy. Something's going on that we're not being told about.
Well, when you have to outsource your technology to even get off the ground, that's pretty sad. Then claim that they have the technology for everything else.
No, they haven't. One of the first people involved in what became JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, or as I prefer to refer to it, Jack Parsons Laboratories, which is now a NASA base. One of the first people who was running that was a guy called Frank Molina, who's brilliant. Now, what happened to him? He actually landed up in Paris as a painter because he was going to be prosecuted under the House Un-American Activities Committee because he had, as they referred to it at the time, left leanings. Most of them did. Most of those original Rocketeers were basically communists. They went to Communist Party meetings in America in the 40s and 50s. The FBI were onto it pretty sharply, and they were all prosecuted. And we're only now beginning to find out exactly how damaging that was to American society.
Yeah, it even got into the movie industry, didn't it?
So you had Jack Parsons, Frank Molina, and Edward Foreman. There was those three guys.
All the history of what went on is fascinating. The sort of political events that went on at the time, how the FBI got involved. Hoover was desperate that people didn't find out that he was a cross-dressing gay. So he would prosecute anybody who was. That would put people off the trail. It's so sad. Quite unnecessary as well. Yes, Frank Molina is a forgotten figure in the start of it. Jack Parsons is not quite so forgotten because his contribution is recognized because he was able to create the solid fuel boosters. And his major change was to use bitumen or asphalt as the unit that would hold everything together without air bubbles, because it was the air bubbles inside that were causing the explosions. And they had to eliminate that to make a long burning rocket. So by using asphalt or bitumen, they could do it. And they still use it today. Bit bigger, but the JATO, the jet assisted takeoff, was very useful in World War II because it enabled heavily laden bombers to take off from relatively short aircraft carriers or airfields. Jack Parsons had a major contribution to make. But how many people even know that he was a part of it? And they all tipped up at Caltech originally, California Institute of Technology. That was where a lot of the early work was done. They did some good work. Frank Molina was a good organizer. He was the guy who created what became JPL, but he was taken out for political reasons. Strange business.
Yeah, the Three Rocketeers, what they were called.
You have to have an American citizen taking the credit.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Can't have somebody that you just brought in. You have to have an American going to take the credit for it because they like to take the credit for everything, except when they're out of credit.
Yeah.
They know how to shovel the shit away
Yes.
perfectly and just take credit for whatever is a shining light for them, even if they have to make it up.
Oh, that's why they invented Walt Disney, wasn't it? He could make things up for them, make it even better.
And then NASA said, hey, that's a good program. Let's go with that.
Let's go with that, yes. And if it appears on television now, or if it appeared on film, it was real. I mean, look at the adulation offered to the early film stars. the Clark Gables, Carol Lombard,
Yeah.
people like that. They were worshipped. They were almost gods at the time. And they were pushed up, and that's where the propaganda came from. Well, you can push somebody like that, and people will go along with it.
What's that famous line back in the 30s when they got some sound in their pictures? Is come up and see me sometime when I have nothing on but the radio.
That's Mae West.
Mae West, yes.
Yeah, come up and see me sometime.
Yeah.
Oh, she was great. I like Mae West.
Guess what they were doing even when there were silent movies? They were doing simulations of rockets landing on the moon.
Yeah, they were. One of the very first
Open
films.
them right in the eye.
Straight in the face. Yeah. Because they had imagination.
They had
Right.
imagination, but they didn't have the technology even to try to make anything realistic
No, they didn't.
or within specifications, but they created the image. They triggered human imagination to travel to the moon, and they put it on film. Then Disney took that one step farther when they included Martin the Martian in their cartoons with Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? And he comes out and he thought there should have been an earth-shattering kaboom, right? Kind of thing. But it still triggers the imagination.
Yeah, it
When
does.
you're a child, you grow up and you see that space travel and all of the other stuff, and it didn't matter whether it was in animation or NASA was projecting it as the real thing.
And it was from a film that the idea of a reverse count to a launch of a rocket, the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that came from a German film in the 1920s. And that's how they launched their rockets. And they've been doing it ever since because it's very dramatic.
See, I think what's happening here, a lot of it is that they're only seeing it from their point of view.
That's the launch on Apollo 17, isn't it? That's the takeoff from the moon.
See how it's bouncing up and down here?
Yeah.
He's trying to track the thing by moving the damn stick up and down.
There's a guy called Ed Fendel, I believe it was, at Houston, who was operating the remote cameras.
I'm talking about the onboard cameras that they've redone the images on. And of course, the cameras are mounted solidly in the window, and then you can just see them rocking on the gantry cables.
That's an interesting observation, Robert, that one. It's the camera that moves, not the craft.
Yeah, it is. It's the craft, right?
If it's being pulled up off the gantry crane, it can only go up 280 feet. And the rest of it, they just zoom out.
Well, it's not going any further.
It just goes up to that, and then they zoom it back.
Yeah.
To make it look like it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There, they're zooming it right there. You can see it.
Oh, I see. It says a roller coaster comprised a jet-propelled cart sliding along the tracks pitched so that they can mimic the ascent trajectory can be constructed that reproduces the broadcast perfectly. Why would you need a jet-propelled cart sliding along tracks? A jet-propelled cart? This is in a studio. I don't get it. I could see dolly tracks, but...
Well, if they're underneath a 600-foot long gantry crane, maybe they need a little more power. Well, he's definitely created a possibility on how it could work to get the effect.
Oh, yeah, I mean, but you could just see what's happening. Like the guy is just trying to find it. He's trying to track it, so he's going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down.
And because he's working with a time delay, we're told, he can't do it very accurately.
No. The other thing interesting is when it gets to the edge here, watch, you see, then he's finally starting to track it now because he's slowing down. Then he's pan. Oh, don't have to pan as much now. See, then he's kind of locking onto it. But that's where it goes out of the frame and it's gone.
Yeah. Interesting.
But when he was doing the tracking here, I mean, he does have a point. I mean, it is the actual camera that is going up and down. So that's what he's trying to say. It's just that I don't agree that it's on a rocket sled.
No, it doesn't look like it.
No, because it was on the so-called rover. Well, that's where it was supposed to be.
You see, all these things, the more people look at the detail, the more they find anomalous information.
Just go about halfway in, about 4 minutes in, and just watch the way they've stabilized this. They stabilize the ground. You can see the rocking of the vehicle on the cables, like they've stabilized the ground, So they're altering the camera lens there, and that camera is solidly mounted in the window. So that vehicle is rocking back and forth, just hanging off the gantry cables as it's going over their plaster mold. And that's exactly what you're looking at, because the vehicle would not be rocking like that. It's a very steady rock that it's got going on there. And you can compare that to exactly when you see the simulations for Gemini and everything else when they were practicing inside the hangar. When they were doing docking and undocking sequence, you can see the vehicles rocking back and forth against each other. That's exactly what you're seeing there. And they actually enhanced it by using their stabilization and speed corrected HD quality source in doing that. And it doesn't stop. You could see it before on the ground swinging back and forth, but this is even clearer because they just made a box frame that's rocking back and forth.
It is. It's very clear.
That wouldn't happen. The vehicle should be traveling under a thrust. When you get that far in, you've already reached the orbit so that there is no thrust of any kind. The main rockets have quit. If they're going to make an adjustment, those little retros are going to turn it one way or the other, and it's going to continue to move that way. It's going to start and move and continue to move. This is just rocking back and forth. It can't be rocking back and forth.
You know, you could really see it with the one that's not stabilized. Just the regular one, it's worse.
I know, but this actually frames it out. You can see it. They just reversed what was happening, right?
I mean, certainly watching that frame move around, it's so obvious.
They try their best to take the fakery out of their fakery.
They failed.
And failed.
Whatever the camera is that they've got, assuming it's a film camera, it should be mounted in the window, as we've seen quite regularly. Somebody is holding this one, or it's not being held properly.
Oh no, if you look at this, this is not in the window. Watch this version here.
Oh, that one's not in the window, no.
No, this is the same one you just sent me, except this is just the original. This hasn't been touched. Watch that. That camera's not mounted in the window. He's holding it.
Yeah, he turned it down to show the shadow.
And if anybody wishes to know how you make an LRO photo, you take any one of these liftoffs and watch this. I'm just going to give you guys all the little tip of how these clowns are doing this stuff. You wait until the equipment starts showing up at the bottom here. Just about there now. We're just about there. Okay, see, there we go right there. Then we stop it, and then we go like this, and we take a screenshot of it, like this. There you go. Go out like this, and then all you do is you crop it, take the color out, and you have yourself an LRO photo. And how do you think these guys did it? This is how they did it. Yeah. Because all these tracks are now going to match. Everything will match.
And they can't update that. They have to keep the same stuff over and over again and preserve it. So if they come up with a new image, they've got something to work with.
They're desperate to try to say that they've got photographs on the moon. Well, now we know how they did it during the original takeoffs, the original films. You say just make a screen cap. It's so obvious when you start looking into it. It's like some of David Copperfield's magic tricks. As soon as you know how they're done, they're not magic anymore. They're just very good pieces of engineering. That's why I like looking at pictures of, this is how they did those magic tricks. You know, the famous one of Penn and Teller when they ran over with a big 40-ton truck. Extraordinary. So easy to do it when you think about it. 3-card trick is not a trick anymore as soon as you know how it's done. So as soon as you know how Apollo was done, the magic of Apollo becomes commonplace. And the cult of Apollo starts collapsing because now we know what's on behind it. When you see charismatic cult leaders brought down by their inadequacies, the whole cult falls apart. You can only ever have one charismatic leader.
Is that the magic of the spacesuits?
Well,
right?
no, Scott, you mustn't ask embarrassing questions.
You'll end up like Thomas Barron if you keep asking those questions.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, they can walk successfully and bounce around and fall down and do everything on the moon, but they can't even walk one time in the Sandusky chamber with those spacesuits on. Not even
because they don't have an optical printer in the Sandusky chamber.
No, it would show the magic, wouldn't it, if they did?
I mean, they could pretend to turn the thing on at least and try and fake it there. They don't actually have to create a vacuum in there. They can just put people in and film it and say they're in a vacuum.
But you know what? No matter how many times we call them out to take one of those suits, I don't care which one it is, from any mission, put that suit in the Sandusky chamber after you filled it with 3.2 pounds of air. Yeah. And let's see that thing actually stay in there for 8 hours.
That sort of thing works because people believe what they're being told. They don't think it through.
Raza, he sent me a link. Elon Musk actually claimed that those suits have not been tested properly in a vacuum, and that if there was a leak in that craft, they would be dead. They could only last 10 minutes because they're not made to seal everything up. That just goes to show you what Scott was saying about those masks, how they just take the mask and push them down and twist down back here, and they're supposed to be sealed by that piece of rubber. Yeah. So 15 minutes maximum is all they have to get their act together before those suits start leaking. Yeah. Because they're flight suits. They're not space suits.
No. Depends how much vacuum they're exposed to and how rapidly they're exposed to that vacuum.
So can you imagine what would happen in the Sandusky chamber? They would just go pop, and that would be it. There was a video that this fella put out yesterday. I believe it was the Everyday Astronaut. It was a different one. This time, the astronaut had a rip in his glove. Cool. And they had to abort the whole mission. What had happened was NASA finally figured out, you know, the rail that they hold on to and they snake their way down that rail? What happened was that because these micrometeorites are smacking into that rail, they're making very sharp pits in the rail. And when they're going down, they're slicing the glove open. So this guy had just a tiny little tear in the glove. But it didn't go all the way through. It was just a rip, and it was almost ready to puncture. So they aborted the mission. And that's what they found when they investigated it. And yet, the Everyday Astronaut put out that same video a year earlier where he said that that astronaut had a hole in the glove, and he stayed out there for 10 hours working. Tis but a scratch.
Tis but a scratch. You know, it's the cult of Apollo again. Because they haven't got their charismatic leaders in place, the James Webbs, the Neil Armstrongs, the guys who are honest about things, it's all falling apart, completely falling apart, falling apart, falling apart, falling apart, falling apart.